The time has come to teach you about playing Postman. Even if you don't play Postman yourself, I recommend sticking around to watch, as understanding how a character works is just as important to playing with them well as it is to playing as them well. First, the basics. Victor is a versatile support character who provides temporary buffs to teammates from long distances. He does this with his post dog, Wick, who can deliver one of 6 letters to teammates in other locations. Letter buffs are chosen from selections of 3 at a time, and survivors can only have 1 letter buff at a time. Every time Victor sends a letter to a teammate, he also gains the selected buff. Alternatively, Victor can keep a letter just for himself, which requires no delivery from Wick. The letters have a cooldown of 60 seconds after a successful use and no cooldown for failed delivery. Wick is also capable of pouncing on hunters, which applies a 1-second stun to the hunter, followed by a 2.5-second walking speed slowdown of 35%. Wick's Pounce has a 45-second cooldown after a success, and a 16-second cooldown after a failure. Now for the implementation. And before I get into it, I'd like to remind you that Victor is a versatile support, so preferred strategies for him can vary from player to player. My suggestions here are based on my own gameplay preferences. The most important aspect to playing Victor well is knowing which letters to send, including when and to who. He works best in teams who communicate well and frequently because you'll need to know at all times who is decoding, kiting, harassing, etc. in order to get the most use out of his letters. First, we'll go over each of Victor's letters and some circumstances in which you'll send them. The Tranquility Letter increases the recipient's decoding speed by 10% for 30 seconds. This letter is available from the very start of the match, and I would personally recommend making this letter your first delivery to prioritize Cipher Rush while the hunter doesn't have any presence. You can send the Tranquility Letter off to anyone who's decoding, but there are a few survivors to keep in mind specifically. For instance, the buff will not transfer to Mechanic's bot when she switches POVs, so it's best not to give her a Tranquility Letter when she is actively using her bot to decode. Explorer's page usage also does not benefit from the decoding buff, so don't send him one unless you're sure the Explorer is going to stay at his cipher and decode regularly. Additionally, keep in mind that while Tranquility Letters are helpful for rescue characters with decoding debuffs, an early down on the first kite may result in them having to leave their cipher before the buff ends and wasting some of its duration. The Inspiring Letter increases the recipient's vaulting speed by 10%. I generally suggest this letter be your lowest priority for use. It is the longest lasting buff that Victor can provide, but it is really only useful for survivors who have a vaulting debuff like Seer and Mechanic. Very occasionally, I find it handy against hunters like Nightwatch and Disciple, who can pull or stun you off of a vault before you're able to finish it. The Urgent Letter increases the recipient's movement speed by 10% for 15 seconds. This buff is an especially good option against area control hunters like Naiad, as the extra speed helps your teammates avoid getting caught in those large puddles. It's also useful for when you need to transition to another cipher that's a considerable distance away, while also still providing some kiting assistance to your teammate. The Farewell Letter provides the recipient with a single-use, slightly weaker knee-jerk reflex. If they vault a window within 90 seconds of its delivery, their movement speed will increase by 40% for 3 seconds. This is a good when-in-doubt support letter to give a teammate being chased, as it can be utilized either for regular kiting or to help with a transition. The Bravery Letter increases the delivery target's rescue speed by 30% and their movement speed near rocket chairs by 10% for 180 seconds. The usage for this one is pretty self-explanatory. Send it off to whomever on your team is about to execute a rescue. And the Hope Letter increases the delivery target's gate opening speed by 15%, as well as highlights the dungeon's location on the map for them for 120 seconds. If nothing else needs to be prioritized, I like to send these off to teammates while the last cipher is primed. I would recommend either give the letter to a teammate in chase so they can see where the dungeon is and go for it, or to a teammate on the far side of the map from you so that you can try to open both gates quickly. To all of you survivors out there, if a postman is asking to decode the gate when he has this symbol, please let him decode the gate. Letters appear in mostly random rotations, with a few exceptions. The first round of letters always includes the Tranquil, Inspiring, and either Urgent or Farewell letters. The Hope Letter seems to appear more than half the time in letter rotations from the second one onward. When sending letters off for delivery, there are a few things to keep in mind. Firstly, the letter delivery takes time. There is a delay of up to 5 seconds on letter deliveries that Wick is able to complete. Letters cannot be delivered to teammates who are downed, chaired, inside lockers, or are separated from Victor by photographer's camera world. When teammates are downed before a letter can be received, the delivery fails the moment Wick reaches your teammate. When a teammate is inside of a locker, Wick will wait outside of the locker for up to 35 seconds before returning to Victor. During this waiting period, Victor cannot use Wick's Pounce or send other letters. When a teammate is on the opposite side of camera world from Victor, they will not appear as a delivery option at all. It's also worth noting that hunters can see Wick when making or waiting on deliveries. If a teammate is trying to hide from a hunter instead of kiting them, it's better to wait to send them a letter. You can, however, still send a letter to teammates who are downed or chaired. This is useful in instances where you want a specific letter buff that has not appeared in your current rotation. Since there's no cooldown on failed letter deliveries, you can send a letter to a downed teammate to immediately shuffle your selection again. Also remember that, in a pinch, you can just keep a letter for yourself. This is useful for when you're the last man standing and need a speed boost out of the gate, or need to know where the dungeon is, or even if you're just in a chase and can't afford to wait the 5 seconds for Wick to deliver your desired buff to a teammate. When kiting with Victor, you of course have all of your buff letters at your disposal, but you also have Wick's Pounce. The Pounce can be applied at long distance, so long as your aim is good enough, which is especially useful for interrupting the skills of dash hunters like Smiley, Nightwatch, and Opera Singer. The 1-second stun will reset attack recovery, however, so it's best not to use it when a hunter is really breathing down your neck in order to avoid a double hit. Wick's Pounce is also capable of balloon rescuing, but before you rush in to try one of these rescues, there's a few things to keep in mind. First, Wick's stun cannot interrupt the ballooning animation. The hunter must have already finished ballooning your teammate before you have a chance at saving them. Additionally, the stun is only 1 second long, which is not enough time for your teammates to recover and use a trait to defend themselves. Unless the last cipher is primed, you or another survivor need to be there to body block so they can get away. Additionally, remember that balloon rescuing in this way resets your teammate's struggle. If they've been carried a considerable distance or have been receiving support from other harassers, it may be best for you to save your pounce for later and not risk messing up their chance at a struggle-free. Now, let's get into your build and matchup dynamics. This is my personal persona build. I like to run Victor as a pseudo-decoder, but with his letter buffs, he's also viable to build for full kiting or rescue. Whichever build you lean into, however, I recommend leaning fully into it and not trying to go for a little bit of everything. Victor's letters are good at covering small weaknesses, but don't supplement for a proper build. If you want to run Victor for rescue, for example, you should still bring Risky Move for a rescue speed boost, because the Bravery Letter is better to stack on other boosts than to use in place of them. If you want to go with a pseudo-decoder focus like I do, I suggest bringing Bring Effect and Survivor's Instinct. If you're nervous about messing up your calibrations, you can also put some points into Self-Deception. And even if you're not going for a rescue build with Victor, I find that Prisoner's Dilemma is handy for those times when you might need to try for a balloon rescue. Personally, I prefer Knee-Jerk Reflex over Flywheel for Victor because I find that it pairs well with Wick's Pounce and his optional kiting buffs to help maintain extra distance from hunters. For team combos, remember that Cheerleader's Inspire does not affect Victor's letter cooldown, and he cannot pick up other items, including those dropped by Toy Merchant. You should also remember that Wick can potentially give away the position of teammates who prefer to hide, so be especially cautious of your letter timing with survivors who rely on temporary invisibility, like Faro Lady, Magician, and First Officer. Victor can soft counter dash hunters like Smiley and Nightwatch by interrupting their trait usage and resetting cooldowns, but does not hard counter anyone. That's all I have for you folks. Feel free to ask any questions and discuss in the comments below, and if you found this guide helpful, consider liking, sharing, and following for more content.